Well, West Virginians continue to face issues surrounding the slow rollout of opioid funds. It's no secret that we've had the worst overdose death rate in this nation. Spotlight on America's national investigative correspondent Angie Moreschi is joining us now from D.C. as she continues digging deeper. Now, Angie, in your latest report, you're looking at the debate over spending opioid settlement money now for immediate services or investing it for a more long-term approach. Now, what types of spending are we talking about here?
Well, when it comes to spending the opioid settlement dollars, states have a lot of different options. Many advocates say because the crisis is so bad right now, we have more than 100,000 people still dying every year of overdoses in this country. So with that crisis being so intense, they want to see this money flooded into the community right now to save lives with things like spending on treatment services, increasing access to recovery homes, harm reduction services. That's things like naloxone, the overdose reversal medication that they can give to help save lives and lower the number of people dying today. Now, on the other side, we have this concept of investing in the future, and that would be looking into things like youth prevention programs, even spending more money on foster care to help the children of substance users who are at a much higher risk of addiction in the future. And that generational approach for West Virginia is a real part of their strategy. I talked with the executive director of the West Virginia First Foundation, and he says they need to be looking long-term here because this has been such a generational issue to end the cycle of addiction in the state of West Virginia. He says that is key to the future.
And Angie, what are the pros and cons when it comes to spend versus invest?
Well, on the spend now side, we talked to a national organization, the Opioid Policy Institute, and the executive director there says we are indeed in an active crisis right now, and he wants to see this money flooding into the community, being spent as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible to help save lives. Now, he says that's not to say that prevention isn't important. He says it is, but he likens this to a house being on fire and that we need to put out the flames now before we can start looking at the problems of the future. Now, on the other side, the West Virginia First Foundation basically says this cycle of addiction has been going on for quite a long time, 30 years now in the state of West Virginia, and they need to basically do something to stem the tide of future addiction. So he wants to see more money going into things like youth prevention programs to help those children and get them before the addiction starts, and that would make a difference. And again, that's not to say that both of these are not important. They are, and both sides acknowledge that, but it's basically establishing priorities for where the bulk of these dollars will be going. And there is an awful lot of money, an enormous amount of money here. For West Virginia alone, we're talking about more than $1 billion over the next 18 years.
Now, also in your investigations, West Virginia was one of the states that's been slow to get these opioid settlement dollars into the community. Has there been any progress that's been made there?
Well, you know, Daniel, there has. The West Virginia First Foundation has definitely stepped up their efforts to get this money into the community since our original report. They just went through their first phase of applications for the grant process, and that was an expedited review process. As the West Virginia First Executive Director says, they got 174 applications. The application period just closed on October 5th, and so now what is happening is they're looking at those applications. And this is pretty interesting. He says they were expecting to get a lot of the applications for things like recovery homes. But indeed, he says the majority of the applications they received were for youth prevention programs, which is interesting because it falls in line with the strategy that he has put forth to try and stem the tide of abuse, of drug abuse and addiction for the future. So now what's going to happen with those applications is that they will go before an expert panel to review them and score them, and that panel will then make recommendations to the board, which will then vote on who gets the money and how much money. And the executive director says they hope to have that process completed by the end of the year, with dollars going into the community by December 31st. That is their goal. So while West Virginia did lag behind, they are moving much faster now and are hoping to have some dollars in the community by the end of the year.
Well, and finally, and it was another powerful element within your story, was what Jonathan Board, the executive director of the West Virginia First Foundation, mentioned to you about the impact on children. Now, in your conversations with Board, where does he want this money to go, especially to help provide help for these children?
Yeah, he brought forward an eye-popping statistic. 50% of the children in West Virginia are being raised by someone other than their biological parent. And that is because, he says, of the cycle of abuse. Many people dealing with substance use issues, either addiction or incarceration related to drug use. So in light of that, youth prevention programs are going to be a key part of getting through to the young children in your community to help stop this for generations as we move forward.
Spotlight on America's Angie Moreschi, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for advocating for the people of West Virginia.
You're quite welcome.